The scratching started at 11:58 p.m. Sarah pressed her back against the kitchen door, breath fogging in the sudden cold that shouldn't exist in July. 3 deliberate scratches. Pause. 3 more, the pattern her grandmother warned her about. Rule number 1 echoed in her mind. Never answer the door after midnight in Millbrook, Ohio. But it wasn't midnight yet. 2 minutes. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. Wood splintering under something sharp. Sarah's phone showed 11:59. The smell hit her then. Wet earth and copper pennies seeping through the doorframe like fog. Her hand trembled toward the deadbolt. 1 minute left. The scratching stopped. Silence stretched like a held breath. Then came the voice. Sweet. Familiar. Impossible. Sarah, honey, it's Mom. I forgot my keys. Her mother had been dead for 3 years. The clock ticked to midnight. Rule number 1 was now in effect, but the voice continued, patient and loving. I can see your shadow under the door, sweetheart. Just turn the lock. Sarah's fingers hovered over the metal. In Millbrook, Ohio, 6 rules kept you alive. 6 rules passed down through generations of families who learned the hard way. 6 rules written in blood and carved into memory. Break them, and the town collects its debt. The doorknob turned slowly from the outside. Sarah had 30 seconds to decide. Obey the rule and let whatever stood outside remain outside. Or trust the voice that sounded exactly like her mother's last words 3 years ago. I'll always come back for you. The metal was cold under her palm. The voice grew urgent. Sarah, please, it's so cold out here. 15 seconds. She could smell her mother's perfume now, jasmine and vanilla, drifting through the cracks. 10 seconds. The scratching resumed. Frantic now. 5 seconds. Sarah's hand moved toward the lock. 3, 2, 1. The voice stopped. The scratching stopped. The perfume faded. But Sarah's hand was already on the deadbolt. And in the sudden silence, she heard something that made her blood freeze. Footsteps, walking away from the door, across the porch, down the steps, into the yard, stopping directly beneath her bedroom window, where they began to scratch again. Rule number 2. They always find another way in. But what happens when following the rules isn't enough to save you? Millbrook, Ohio looks like any other Rust Belt town. Population 3,847. Main Street lined with boarded windows and fading paint. But beneath the cracked sidewalks and dying maple trees, something darker grows. The locals don't talk about the rules. Not to outsiders. They learned long ago that silence keeps you breathing, that questions get you noticed, and in Millbrook, being noticed is the last thing you want. The 6 rules aren't written anywhere. No welcome signs, no town charter, they're carved into memory by fear, passed down like a disease from parent to child. Rule 1. Never walk alone after sunset. Rule 2. Don't ask about the Hendricks family. Rule 3. Stay away from the old grain elevator on Elm. Street. Rule 4. If you hear the church bells ring 13 times, go inside immediately. Rule 5. Never, ever look directly at the man in the gray coat. Rule 6. What happens in Millbrook stays in Millbrook. Break these rules, and you become part of the town's dark collection. The sheriff knows. The mayor knows. The pastor at First Baptist knows. They all know because they've all seen what happens to rule breakers. The disappearances started in 1987. Sarah Chen, 17. Honor student. She asked too many questions about the Hendricks place. They found her shoes by Miller's Creek. Nothing else. Then Marcus Webb in 92. Walked past the grain elevator at midnight on a dare. His friends watched him vanish into the shadows between the rusted silos. The screaming lasted 3 minutes. By morning, even the echo was gone. 23 people have broken the rules since 1987. 23 names scratched off voter rolls. Social security numbers deleted, as if they never existed at all. The town council meets every first Tuesday. Same agenda item every month. Maintaining community standards. They never say the word rules. They don't have to. The smell of sulfur drifts through the meeting room. The temperature drops 10 degrees. Councilman Peters' hands shake as he calls for adjournment, because even the people who enforce the rules are terrified of what created them. Something lives in Millbrook's shadows, something that feeds on defiance. It's been hungry for 36 years, and it's getting stronger. But what the town council doesn't know is that someone's been documenting everything, recording names, dates, patterns. Someone who's about to break the most important rule of all. That was just the beginning. Sarah Chen thought she knew Millbrook, Ohio, born and raised on Elm Street. Graduated from the same high school as her parents. 23 years of quiet suburban nights. She'd heard the whispers about the rules. 6 simple guidelines that everyone in town seemed to follow without question. Old wives' tales, she figured. Superstitions left over from when Millbrook was just farmland and coal mines. Rule 1. Never go out after midnight. Sarah had laughed at that one. What could possibly happen in a town where the biggest crime was jaywalking? The night she broke it, October frost clung to her windshield like skeletal fingers. 47 p.m. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, stranded at the gas station on Route 9. Dead battery, no other friends available. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she texted back. The streets felt different after midnight. Empty, yes, but wrong somehow. Street lights flickered in patterns that made no sense. The familiar houses looked hollow, their windows black and watching. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The heater couldn't touch the cold creeping up her spine. Then she saw them. Figures standing in front yards. Perfectly still. Facing the street. At first, just one. Mrs. Patterson from Pine Avenue standing beside her mailbox in a nightgown. Sarah slowed. Concerned. But Mrs. Patterson didn't move. Didn't acknowledge the car. Just stood there, staring. 2 blocks later, another figure, Mr. Kowalski from the hardware store. Same position, same vacant stare. Sarah's breath fogged the windows as she counted them. 7 figures now. All residents she recognized. All standing guard in their front yards like sentinels. The radio crackled to life. Sarah. Her blood turned to ice. The voice was her own. Sarah, turn around. She fumbled for the radio dial, but the voice continued. You shouldn't have come out tonight. They've been waiting for someone to break the first rule. In her rearview mirror, the figures had moved. They were following her car now, walking in perfect synchronization down the center of the street. Sarah floored the accelerator. The speedometer climbed past 50, 60, 70 through residential streets. But in every yard she passed, more figures appeared. Standing, watching, waiting, the gas station came into view. Empty. No Marcus, no car, just a handwritten sign taped to the door. Welcome to the real Millbrook, Sarah. Behind her, footsteps echoed on asphalt. Getting closer. But what they wanted from her was just the beginning. Sarah Chen learned about the eyes on her 3rd day in Millbrook, Ohio. The rental car's engine ticked in the August heat as she parked outside the corner grocery. Sweat beaded on her forehead. The asphalt shimmered like black water. Inside, the clerk's smile never reached his eyes. He watched her fingers trace the candy aisle, watched her select a Diet Coke from the cooler. New in town? His voice carried the weight of judgment. Sarah nodded. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps. You'll want to learn the rules quick. He rang up her items with deliberate slowness. Folks here take them serious. Rule 4 echoed in her mind. Never ignore when the town is watching. Outside, she felt them before she saw them, eyes tracking her movement from porch swings and kitchen windows. An elderly woman watering petunias paused mid-pour. A jogger slowed his pace, earbuds dangling loose. The sensation crawled up Sarah's spine like ice water. At the traffic light, she counted them. 7 people, all staring, all perfectly still. The light turned green. She pressed the accelerator. In her rearview mirror, the watchers remained frozen. 7 statues in a living tableau. The woman still held her watering can midair. The jogger stood motionless on the sidewalk. Sarah's hands trembled on the steering wheel. That evening, she called her sister in Portland. "There's something wrong with this place, Jen. The way they look at you. Paranoid much?" Jennifer's laugh crackled through the phone. "Small towns are just nosy. You'll adjust." But Sarah had grown up in small towns. This felt different. She hung up and pulled the curtains tight. Through a gap in the fabric, she glimpsed her neighbor's house. Mrs. Patterson sat in her kitchen window, coffee cup raised to her lips. She hadn't moved in 20 minutes. The cup never touched her mouth. Sarah's breath fogged the glass as she leaned closer. Mrs. Patterson's eyes reflected the streetlight like a nocturnal animal's. Unblinking. Predatory. The old woman's head turned with mechanical precision. Their eyes met through the darkness. Mrs. Patterson's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. Might have been a warning. Sarah stumbled backward, heart hammering against her ribs. When she looked again, the kitchen window was empty. But on her front porch, something white gleamed in the moonlight. An envelope. No postmark. No return address. Just her name written in spidery handwriting that seemed to move in the shadows. Sarah's hand froze on the doorknob. Because she could hear them now, footsteps circling her house like wolves. But when she looked outside, the street was empty. Sarah learned about Rule 3 the hard way. She'd been living in Millbrook for exactly 17 days when insomnia struck. The kind that makes your skin crawl and your thoughts spiral into dark corners. At 12:47 a.m., she heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling her house like a predator marking territory. The floorboards beneath her feet groaned as she crept toward the living room window. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Never look outside after midnight, child. Some things aren't meant to be seen." But curiosity is a cruel master. Sarah's fingers trembled against the curtain fabric, rough cotton that smelled of mothballs and decades of fear. The footsteps stopped directly outside her window. Silence, then breathing. Deep, rhythmic, like someone savoring the moment before a feast. Her rational mind screamed warnings. Turn away. Go back to bed. Follow the rules that kept this town's children alive for generations. Instead, she pulled the curtain aside. The street looked normal. Empty sidewalks bathed in amber streetlight. Mrs. Henderson's garden gnomes standing sentinel in their neat rows. Then she saw them, eyes. Dozens of pairs, floating in the darkness between houses. Not human eyes. Too large, too bright, reflecting light like polished silver coins. They watched her with ancient patience. Sarah's breath fogged the glass as terror locked her muscles in place. The eyes began moving closer, maintaining their formation like a constellation of malevolent stars. One pair stopped directly in front of her window. The thing behind those eyes smiled. She couldn't see its mouth, but she felt the cruel amusement radiating through the glass. Cold seeped through the window, turning her breath to visible vapor. That's when she understood. The rules weren't suggestions. They were a contract written in blood and desperation by people who'd learned what happened when you broke them. Sarah stumbled backward, releasing the curtain. But the damage was done. She'd been seen. The next morning, her neighbors found frost covering her windows in perfect handprint patterns. dozens of them pressed against the glass from outside. Sarah never spoke about that night. But those who knew her before said something fundamental had changed. She moved differently now, like someone carrying invisible weight. Every night at midnight, she'd sit in her kitchen with all the lights off, listening, waiting. Because breaking Rule 3 didn't just mean seeing them. It meant they could see you too. Sarah Martinez had lived in Millbrook, Ohio for 3 months when she broke Rule 6. Never ask questions about the missing. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and something else, something metallic that made her stomach turn. She stood at the edge of Founders Park, staring at the weathered memorial stone. 17 names, she whispered, counting again. 17 people who had simply vanished over the past decade. No bodies, no investigations that led anywhere. Just empty houses and grieving families who learned to stop asking why. Sarah's journalism instinct screamed that this wasn't normal. Small towns didn't lose 17 people without answers, not unless someone was making sure those answers stayed buried. The cold October wind cut through her jacket as she photographed the memorial. Each name, etched in granite, told a story the town refused to acknowledge. Maria Santos, age 24, David Chen, age 31, Rebecca Walsh, age 19. All had one thing in common. They'd asked too many questions. You shouldn't be here after dark. Sarah spun around. An elderly man emerged from the shadows between the oak trees, his face gaunt in the moonlight. She recognized him as Harold Winters, the town librarian. Just paying respects, Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. Harold's eyes fixed on her camera. Some respects are better left unpaid. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah's breath formed clouds in the suddenly frigid air. The streetlights flickered, casting dancing shadows across the memorial. What happened to them? Sarah asked. Harold stepped closer. His footsteps made no sound on the frost-covered grass. They forgot that some secrets keep a town alive, and some secrets keep a town fed. Sarah's blood turned to ice water. Fed? The old man smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp in the dim light. Rule 6 exists for a reason, Miss Martinez. The missing aren't gone. They're just serving a different purpose now. Behind Harold, more figures emerged from the darkness. Townspeople Sarah recognized from the grocery store, the post office, the diner. Their eyes reflected the moonlight like animals. You see, curiosity has a price in Millbrook, Harold continued, and payment is always collected. Sarah's camera slipped from her trembling hands, shattering on the concrete. The circle of townspeople tightened around her. But what they did next would make her understand why Rule 6 was the most important of all. Mrs. Henderson lived in the house with the blue shutters, the one where children crossed the street to avoid walking past. She'd been watching our town for 73 years, watching, remembering, keeping count. That Tuesday morning she called me to her porch. Her fingers, gnarled like old tree roots, gripped my wrist. Her skin felt like paper left too long in the sun. "You're new here," she whispered, "so you don't know yet." The morning air carried the scent of dying leaves and something else. Something metallic. "Know what, Mrs. Henderson?" Her pale blue eyes fixed on mine. "About the rules, about what happens when people break them." She pointed to the empty lot across the street, where grass grew in perfect circles, like nature was trying to forget something. The Kowalski family used to live there. Beautiful house, white picket fence, 3 children. My stomach tightened. "They broke rule number 4, she continued. "Thought they were smarter than the rest of us, thought the rules didn't apply to them." The wind picked up, rattling the dead leaves in her gutters. "What happened to them?" Mrs. Henderson's grip tightened. "They left in the middle of the night. All of them. But they didn't pack." She leaned closer. Her breath smelled like old medicine and fear. The moving truck came the next morning, but there was nothing to move. The house was empty, clean, like they'd never existed at all. I tried to pull away, but her fingers held firm. The realtor said it was a gas leak, said that's why they had to tear it down so fast. But gas leaks don't make people disappear. She released my wrist suddenly. 5 red marks remained where her fingers had been. Rule number 4, she repeated. Never go into the woods after midnight. Never, no matter what you hear calling your name. My skin crawled. How do you know about the rules? Mrs. Henderson smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Child, I helped write them. She stood slowly, joints creaking like old floorboards. 73 years I've lived here. 73 years I've watched people come and go. The smart ones learn fast. The stubborn ones. She gestured to the empty lot. Well, you can see for yourself. As I walked away, her voice followed me. Remember, dear, the rules exist for a reason. They keep us safe. They keep us alive. I didn't look back, but I could feel her watching until I turned the corner. That night I heard something calling my name from the woods. But that's when I learned rule number 4 wasn't the worst one. Rule 4 was simple. Never open the basement door after midnight. Sarah thought she knew better. The old Victorian house on Elm Street had been in her family for 3 generations. Every woman who lived there learned the rules. Her grandmother whispered them. Her mother wrote them down. But Sarah was different. She was educated, rational. She didn't believe in small-town superstitions. The basement door stood at the end of the hallway, painted white like all the others. But this one had 7 deadbolts, each installed by a different generation of women who lived in fear. Sarah counted them every night before bed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All locked tight. But on October 13th, 1987, something changed. The scratching started at 11:47 p.m., soft at first, like fingernails on wood, then harder, more desperate, the sound of something trying to claw its way out. Sarah pressed her ear to the door. The scratching stopped. Silence stretched through the hallway like a held breath. The floorboards creaked under her bare feet. Cold air seeped through the gap beneath the door, carrying the smell of damp earth and something else. Something rotting. "Hello?" she whispered. 3 knocks answered back. Slow, deliberate, from directly behind the door. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the first deadbolt. The metal was ice cold against her palm. It turned with a click that echoed through the empty house. 1 down. 6 to go. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Click, click, click. 3 deadbolts open now. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Sarah's breath came out in white puffs. The scratching resumed, but different this time. Multiple sets of claws. Dozens of them, all scratching in perfect unison. 4 deadbolts left. Sarah's rational mind screamed at her to stop, to walk away, to follow the rule that kept her family safe for over a century. But curiosity is a powerful drug, and Sarah was already addicted. Click, click. 2 deadbolts remaining. The door began to shake, not from the scratching, from something pushing against it, something heavy, something that wanted out more than Sarah wanted in. Her hand hovered over the 6th deadbolt. The clock in the hallway chimed midnight. Rule 4 was about to be broken, but Sarah had no idea that some doors were never meant to be opened, especially when you don't know what's been waiting on the other side. Sarah Chen had lived in Millbrook, Ohio for 3 months. 3 months of perfect lawns. 3 months of neighbors who smiled too wide. 3 months of following the unwritten rules that everyone seemed to know, but no one would explain. Until tonight. The streetlights cast long shadows across Maple Street as Sarah walked home from her late shift at the diner. The October air bit at her cheeks, carrying the scent of burning leaves and something else. Something metallic. She should have taken the main road. Should have remembered what Mrs. Patterson whispered at the grocery store. Never walk alone after dark on the side streets. But Sarah was tired. Tired of cryptic warnings. Tired of rules that made no sense. The first rule she'd learned was simple. Always be home before the church bells ring at midnight. It was 11:47 p.m. when she heard the footsteps behind her. Slow. Deliberate. Matching her pace exactly. Sarah's breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as she quickened her steps. The footsteps quickened too. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. She turned onto Elm Street, her apartment just 2 blocks away. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched like a held breath. Sarah glanced over her shoulder. The street was empty. Nothing but shadows, dancing under the flickering streetlights. Then she saw it, a figure standing perfectly still beneath the old oak tree. Tall, unnaturally thin. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, watching her with eyes that reflected the light like mirrors. Sarah's throat went dry. The metallic smell grew stronger, mixing with the taste of copper on her tongue. The church bells began to chime. 1, 2, 3. The figure took a step forward. 4, 5, 6. Another step. Its movements were wrong, like a marionette with tangled strings. 7, 8, 9. Sarah ran. Her sneakers slapped against the wet pavement as the bells continued their countdown to midnight. Behind her, she could hear it following. Not running, walking with that same deliberate pace. 10, 11. She reached her apartment building, fumbling for her keys with trembling fingers. The metal was ice cold against her skin. 12. The bells fell silent. Sarah turned the key and burst through the door, slamming it behind her. She pressed her back against the wood, gasping for air that tasted like fear. Through the window, she watched the street, empty. But on her doorstep, written in what looked like ash, were 5 words that made her blood freeze. You broke the first rule. Sarah stared at the message, her mind racing. If this was what happened when you broke just one rule, what happened when you broke them all? Mrs. Henderson lived in the house at the end of Maple Street for 63 years. She'd seen things, remembered things the town council preferred forgotten. The morning after Tommy Martinez disappeared, she knocked on my door at exactly 6:47 a.m. Her arthritic fingers clutched a manila envelope, yellowed with age. You're asking questions about the rules, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. Stop! The smell of lavender and mothballs clung to her cardigan. But underneath, something metallic, something that reminded me of pennies left in rain. Mrs. Henderson, I just want to understand why. Understanding gets you buried in Potter's Field with the others. Her voice cracked like autumn leaves. Rule number 4 isn't just about staying inside after midnight. It's about what comes hunting when the streetlights flicker. She pressed the envelope into my hands. The paper felt cold, despite the July heat. 7. 3 teenagers thought they were clever. Thought they could break rule number 2. Never walk alone past the old Sinclair factory. Her pale blue eyes fixed on mine. They found pieces of Sarah Chen scattered across 6 different cornfields. My stomach lurched. The police report said it was a car accident. Police reports say lots of things. Mrs. Henderson's laugh sounded like breaking glass. Sheriff Morrison's been writing creative fiction for 40 years. Keeps the tourism board happy. Inside the envelope, photographs. Black and white, grainy, but clear enough. A young woman's face, frozen in terror. Claw marks across her throat that looked too precise, too deliberate for any animal. I knew. Rule number 5. Mrs. Henderson continued. Never trust anyone who's lived here longer than 50 years. We've all made compromises, all kept secrets that should have died with us. The morning sun cast long shadows across her weathered face, but her shadow seemed wrong somehow. Too tall, too angular. Mrs. Henderson, what happened to you? What did you see? She backed away from my door, shaking her head. I followed rule number 6 once, just once. Went to the town meeting in the basement of City Hall when they called for volunteers. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. They don't need volunteers for committee work, dear. They need volunteers for feeding time. She turned to leave, then paused. That envelope has names, dates, people who broke the rules and what happened after. Her eyes met mine one final time. But it's missing the most important page, the one that explains what's really running this town. Mrs. Henderson walked away, her footsteps echoing against the empty street. I opened the envelope wider, searching for more photographs. That's when I found the note, written in shaky handwriting. Check the basement of your own house, tonight. Rule number 7 isn't written down anywhere. But there were only 6 rules. Weren't there? Sarah Chen thought she understood the rules. Rule 2, never walk alone after sunset on Maple Street. Rule 3, don't ask questions about the missing, but grief makes people reckless. Her brother Danny had vanished 3 weeks ago. The police stopped returning her calls after day 5. The town council offered their condolences and suggested she move forward. So on that October evening, Sarah found herself walking down Maple Street as darkness swallowed the streetlights. The asphalt felt different under her feet, softer, like it was absorbing her footsteps instead of echoing them back. The air tasted of copper and wet leaves. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through Danny's last messages. Something's wrong here, Sarah. The town. It's not what we thought. A door creaked open behind her. You shouldn't be here. Sarah turned to see Mrs. Hendricks, the librarian, standing in her doorway. Her face was pale, eyes wide with something that looked like terror. I'm looking for my brother. Your brother broke the rules, Mrs. Hendricks whispered, just like you're doing now. Sarah stepped closer. The porch light flickered, casting dancing shadows across the woman's weathered face. What happened to him? Mrs. Hendricks glanced left, then right. Her hands trembled as she gripped the doorframe. There are things in this town that feed on curiosity, on people who ask too many questions. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Sarah's breath misted in the suddenly frigid air. Danny found something, didn't he? He found the records. In the basement archives. Files going back 60 years. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. What records? Names. Dates. All the people who broke the rules. A streetlight. Behind Sarah went out with a sharp pop. Then another. Mrs. Hendricks backed into her house. They know you're here now. They know you're asking. Wait. The door slammed shut. Sarah stood alone on Maple Street as the remaining lights died one by one. The darkness crept toward her like spilled ink. Her phone buzzed. A text from Danny's number. Rule 4. Never trust the librarian. But Danny's phone had been found in the river. Sarah looked up from her screen to find herself surrounded by figures in the darkness. Their eyes reflected what little moonlight remained. She had broken Rules 2 and 3. Now she was about to learn why the other rules existed. The town council chamber reeked of fear and old wood. 6 empty chairs sat in judgment. 6 rules carved into the wall behind them, each letter stained dark with something that wasn't paint. Marcus stood in the center, his wrists bound with rope that cut deep enough to draw blood. The townspeople filled every seat, every corner, their faces pale in the flickering candlelight. But their eyes burned with something ancient. You broke rule number 4. Elder Whitman's voice cracked like winter ice. Never question the disappeared. The crowd shifted. Wooden floors groaned under their weight. Marcus had asked about Sarah. Just one question. Where did she go after breaking rule number 2? Now he knew why no one answered. The rules aren't suggestions, Whitman continued, his fingers tracing the carved words. They're survival. They're the only thing standing between this town and what lives beneath it. A child whimpered in the back row. Her mother's hand clamped over her mouth, but the sound had already escaped. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Marcus felt it too, that presence pressing against the chamber walls. Something vast and hungry, waiting just beyond the candlelight's reach. Sarah questioned the rules, Whitman whispered. She wanted to know why we couldn't leave after sunset, why we couldn't speak certain names, why children born here never age past 16. The crowd's breathing synchronized. In, out, like a single organism preparing to feed. So we gave her to the underneath. Whitman smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. Just like we gave the others. Just like we'll give you. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. The townspeople weren't prisoners of the rules. They were the enforcers. Every missing person, every unexplained disappearance, every family that simply vanished overnight. They hadn't fled the town's darkness. They'd been sacrificed to it. 6 rules to survive. Whitman stood, his shadow stretching across the chamber like reaching claws. But only one rule that matters. Feed the underneath, or become its food. The floorboards began to crack. Something stirred in the basement below. Marcus realized with crystal clarity that he'd never broken rule number 4. He'd walked straight into rule number 6, the rule they never spoke aloud. The rule written in blood beneath all the others. But what crawled up through those splintering floorboards made him understand why some rules should never be learned. The basement of the Millbrook Community Center reeked of mildew and old secrets. Councilman Hayes spread 6 yellow documents across the concrete table. Each page bore the town seal from 1953. These aren't suggestions, he whispered to the gathered families. They're survival instructions? The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on faces that had lived with these rules for decades. Rule 1. Never walk alone after sunset on Elm Street. Rule 2. Don't ask about the missing children from 53. Rule 3. If you hear the church bells ring 13 times, stay inside. Rule 4. Never dig deeper than 3 feet anywhere in town. Rule 5. Don't look directly at the Morrison House windows after dark. Rule 6. If someone offers you a ride in a black sedan, run. Mary Chen's grandmother had whispered these same rules to her 40 years ago. Now she watched her own daughter's face pale with recognition. But why? 16-year-old Jake Morrison demanded. What happens if we break them? Hayes pulled out a manila folder. Inside, police reports dating back 7 decades. Missing persons, unexplained accidents, families who simply vanished. The Hendersons broke Rule 4 in 1987, Hayes said, his voice barely audible. Found something buried in their backyard. Something that should have stayed buried. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. They disappeared 3 days later. All 4 of them. House looked like they'd just stepped out for groceries. Jake's mother gripped his arm. Her fingers felt like ice. The rules aren't about control, Hayes continued. They're about containment. This town sits on something old, something that feeds on curiosity. But then Sarah Walsh, the librarian, spoke up from the back corner. Her voice shook with decades of suppressed truth. That's not the whole story, Harold. Every head turned. Hayes's face went white. Tell them about the council's real job, Sarah demanded. Tell them who's been enforcing these rules. Tell them about the black sedan. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Hayes's hands trembled as he closed the folder. When he looked up, his eyes held a terrible resignation. The sedan isn't something we fear, he whispered. It's something we use. The basement suddenly felt smaller, colder, like a trap that had just sprung shut. Mary Chen realized with growing horror that her family hadn't been protected by the rules all these years. They'd been prisoners. But if the council had been the real threat all along, who had they been protecting the town from? The sixth rule had always been the strongest. Never trust the authorities to save you. Maria Santos learned this the hard way on October 15, 2019. She'd followed every rule religiously for 3 years, stayed inside after sunset, avoided the old cemetery, never spoke the forbidden names. But when her 8-year-old daughter Emma went missing, Maria broke. She called 911 at 3:47 a.m., her voice cracking like ice over deep water. "My daughter's gone. Please, you have to help me." The dispatcher's response chilled her blood. "Ma'am, we don't respond to calls from Millbrook after midnight. You know the rules." Click. Maria stared at the dead phone, her hands trembling. The silence pressed against her eardrums like cotton soaked in fear. Outside, fog rolled through the streets like searching fingers. Emma's bedroom window stood open. The screen hung in tatters. Something had taken her child. Maria grabbed her father's old hunting rifle from the closet. The metal felt ice cold against her palms. She'd sworn never to venture out during the dark hours. But rules meant nothing when your baby was screaming somewhere in the night. The front door creaked as she stepped onto the porch. The October air bit through her thin nightgown. Every shadow seemed to pulse with malevolent life. She followed the muddy footprints leading toward the woods. They weren't human. The prints measured nearly 12 inches long, with claw marks gouged deep into the earth. Whatever had Emma moved on 4 legs, but the stride pattern suggested something that could walk upright when it chose to. Maria's breath came in sharp puffs of white vapor. The rifle's weight grew heavier with each step. Behind her, the town's streetlights flickered and died one by one. The darkness was following. She reached the tree line at 4:15 a.m. The footprints led deeper into the forest, toward the old mining tunnels where children had been disappearing for decades. A child's cry echoed from somewhere ahead. Emma. Maria plunged into the woods, branches tearing at her skin like desperate fingers. The rifle barrel caught moonlight as she pushed through the undergrowth. She never considered that some rules exist for reasons beyond human understanding. Some protection comes with a price, and some mothers discover that love makes you break every rule that keeps you alive. The crying stopped. Then Maria heard something else moving through the trees behind her. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the final document. Rule 6. Never speak of what you see after midnight. But this wasn't just another warning scrawled in desperate handwriting. This was different. Official. Stamped with the town seal from 1952. The basement air tasted of mold and forgotten secrets. Dust motes danced in her flashlight beam like tiny ghosts, each one carrying the weight of 70 years of silence. She read the classified memo again. Her breath caught. Project Nightwatch. Containment protocol established. The 6th rule wasn't written by some paranoid resident. It was government mandate, federal oversight, a cover-up so deep it had roots in the Cold War. Her grandfather's signature stared back at her from the bottom of the page. Mayor William Chen, the man who raised her, the man who taught her to always tell the truth, the man who helped bury the biggest lie in Ohio history. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or join them. The basement suddenly felt smaller, colder. The familiar creak of floorboards above made her freeze. Someone was in the house. She clicked off the flashlight and listened. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Moving toward the basement door. The documents in her hands detailed everything. The midnight experiments. The missing families. The reason why Rule 6 existed, not to protect the town from what lurked in the darkness, to protect the darkness from the town. Because the things that emerged after midnight weren't invaders. They were escapees. Test subjects who'd been transformed in underground labs beneath the very streets she'd walked her entire life. Her grandfather hadn't just known about the experiments. He'd funded them, approved them, signed the death warrants of dozens of families. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. Sarah stuffed the documents into her jacket and crept toward the back exit. The metal door handle felt like ice against her palm. She turned it slowly, praying it wouldn't squeak. Behind her, the basement door opened. "Sarah?" A voice called down. Familiar, warm, concerned. It was her grandfather's voice, but her grandfather had been dead for 3 years. She ran into the night, clutching the truth that would destroy everything she'd ever believed about her family, her town, and herself. But the real horror hadn't even begun. Sarah Martinez had followed the rules for 3 years. Rule 1. Never walk alone after sunset. Rule 2. Don't ask questions about the missing families. Rule 3. Always carry salt in your pocket. But tonight, standing in her kitchen with trembling hands, she realized the rules weren't protection. They were prison bars. The envelope had arrived that morning. No postmark, no return address, just her name written in that familiar, spidery handwriting that made her stomach clench. Time to pay your debt, Sarah. Inside, a photograph. Her daughter Emma walking home from school. A red circle drawn around her small figure. The salt packet in Sarah's pocket felt heavier now. Like carrying stones. She'd moved to Millbrook to escape her past. The gambling debts, the loan sharks, the threats. This quiet Ohio town was supposed to be sanctuary, but Millbrook had its own predators. Rule 4. Never refuse a favor from the council. Rule 5. What happens in the old mill stays buried. Rule 6. Some debts can only be paid in blood. Sarah had learned these rules the hard way, watching neighbors disappear, hearing screams from the mill on moonless nights, seeing the fear in people's eyes when they spoke of the council. Now they wanted her to break Rule 2. The phone rang. Sarah's hand shook as she answered. Mrs. Martinez. The voice was silk over razor wire. I trust you received our message. What do you want? Information about the Henderson family before they left town. Sarah closed her eyes. The Hendersons had asked too many questions, pushed too hard against the rules. Their house had been empty for 6 months now. I don't know anything. Your daughter is very pretty. Reminds me of the Miller girl. Such a shame what happened to her. The line went dead. Sarah's breath came in short gasps. The Miller girl had broken Rule 1. Found 3 days later in the woods, throat torn open. Animal attack, the sheriff had said, but Sarah had seen the bite marks. Too precise, too deliberate. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to Emma's school contact. Her finger hovered over the call button. Rule 7, unspoken but understood. There's always a choice, but every choice has consequences. The kitchen window reflected her pale face. Behind her reflection, something moved in the darkness outside. Sarah turned slowly. A figure stood at the edge of her yard, perfectly still, watching, waiting, but when she blinked, it was gone. Sarah Chen had lived in Millbrook, Ohio for 3 months when she first heard about the rules. Not from the welcome committee, not from her neighbors, from the police officer who found her jogging past the old cemetery at 11:47 p.m. Ma'am, you can't be out. Here after 11, Officer Martinez said, his flashlight cutting through the October fog. First rule of living in Millbrook? Sarah laughed. What is this, a curfew? I'm 28 years old. The officer's face went stone cold. The kind of cold that makes your stomach drop. 6 rules keep this town safe, he said slowly. Rule 1. Nobody walks alone after 11 p.m. Ever. Sarah felt the fog seeping through her running jacket. The cemetery gates creaked behind her, metal grinding against metal in the wind. That's ridiculous. This is America, not... Ma'am. His voice cut through her protest like a blade. How many missing person posters have you seen around town? She thought about it. The coffee shop, the library, the grocery store. 12 faces stared back from her memory. All young, all smiling in their photos, all disappeared at night. Those people broke the first rule, Martinez continued. Every single one of them thought they were special. Thought the rules didn't apply to them. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond the cemetery fence. Sarah's breath came out in white puffs. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since sunset, but this cold felt different. Hungry. What happened to them? She whispered. Martinez clicked off his flashlight. In the sudden darkness, his voice became something else entirely. Some things in Millbrook are older than the town itself. Older than the state. They've been here since before we had names for what lurks in the spaces between trees. Another branch snapped. Closer this time. The rules aren't suggestions, ma'am. They're a peace treaty. Between us and them. Sarah's running shoes scraped against the asphalt as she took a step backward. The fog was getting thicker, wrapping around her ankles like fingers. Get in your car, Martinez said. Drive straight home, lock your doors, and never, ever break the first rule again. Sarah ran to her Honda, fumbling with the keys. As she drove away, she glanced in her rearview mirror. Officer Martinez was gone. But something else was standing where he'd been. Something that definitely wasn't human. That was 3 weeks ago. Tonight, Sarah Chen was about to break the first rule again, but this time, she wasn't alone. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the final entry in her grandmother's journal. The ink was still wet, but her grandmother had been dead for 3 days. Rule 6. Never trust the living more than the dead, she whispered to the empty house. The floorboards creaked above her, though she was alone, or so she thought. The journal revealed everything. How the town council hadn't just enforced the rules. They had created them. How every accident that befell rule breakers was carefully orchestrated. How the missing persons weren't missing at all. They were buried beneath the town square. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Mayor Davidson. Emergency town meeting. Mandatory attendance, bring the journal. Her blood turned to ice water. She had never told anyone about finding it. The basement door slammed shut behind her. The lock clicked into place. Sarah spun around, her grandmother's journal clutched against her chest. Mayor Davidson stood at the top of the stairs, his smile cold as winter morning. You broke Rule 1, Sarah. You questioned the rules. Footsteps echoed from every corner of the house. The town council emerged from shadows like vultures circling carrion. Sheriff Martinez, Principal Chen, Dr. Reeves, all of them wearing the same predatory grin. Rule 2, Sheriff Martinez called down. You spoke to outsiders. That reporter you called yesterday. Sarah's throat constricted. She hadn't called anyone, had she? Rule 3. Principal Chen's voice dripped with mock sympathy. You stayed out past midnight. We have the security footage. The walls seemed to close in. Sarah's breathing came in sharp, desperate gasps. Rule 4. You entered forbidden areas. Dr. Reeves gestured to the basement around them. This house has been off-limits since 1987. Mayor Davidson descended one step, then another. Rule 5. You disturb the dead. That journal was buried with your grandmother for a reason. Sarah backed against the cold stone wall. The journal fell from her numb fingers. And Rule 6, the mayor whispered, now close enough that she could smell the decay on his breath. You trusted the living. The basement lights flickered once, then died completely. In the darkness, Sarah heard something that made her soul freeze, her grandmother's voice calling her name, but the real horror hadn't even begun. Sarah's grandmother sits at the kitchen table, her weathered hands trembling around a cup of coffee that's gone cold. The morning light filters through yellowed curtains, casting shadows across her face like prison bars. You want to know why we have the rules? Margaret's voice cracks like old leather. Why we've followed them for 63 years. Sarah nods, her throat tight with anticipation. Margaret's eyes drift to the window, staring at the empty lot where the Hendricks house once stood. It started with the children. The words hang in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. She had 61. 7 kids went missing in 3 weeks. All of them broke the rules. Margaret's fingers trace invisible patterns on the table. Tommy Morrison stayed out past midnight. Found him in the quarry, face down. Sarah's stomach churns. The coffee smell turns sour in her nostrils. Little Amy Chen talked to strangers at the bus stop. They found her shoes by the railroad tracks. Just her shoes. Margaret's voice drops to a whisper. Never found Amy. The kitchen feels smaller now, walls pressing in like a coffin. The town council met in secret. Emergency session. They knew something was hunting us. Margaret's eyes snap back to Sarah, sharp as broken glass. Something that fed on broken rules. Sarah's skin prickles with goosebumps despite the warm air. So, they made a deal. The words hit like a physical blow. With what? Sarah's voice barely escapes her throat. Margaret stands slowly, joints creaking like old floorboards. She walks to the window, pressing her palm against the glass, the thing that lives in the spaces between, the thing that watches from the shadows when children break curfew, the thing that whispers to strangers who linger too long. Sarah feels ice in her veins despite the summer heat. 6 rules to keep it satisfied. 6 rules to keep it fed just enough. Margaret turns, her face pale as moonlight. Because if we don't follow them, the old woman's eyes fill with tears that refuse to fall. If we don't follow them, it takes everyone. Sarah's phone buzzes on the table. A text message from her little brother Jake, staying at Tommy's tonight. Don't tell Mom. The timestamp shows 11:47 p.m. Rule number 1. Be home before midnight. Sarah's blood turns to ice water, but Margaret is already reaching for her coat, her face twisted with terror. We're too late. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled the fire alarm at 3:17 a.m. Rule 1. Never go out after midnight. Rule 2. Never trust the emergency services. Rule 3. Never enter the Old Mill District. Rule 4. Never speak of what you see. Rule 5. Never help outsiders. Rule 6. Never break the other rules. She was about to shatter them all. The piercing wail cut through Millbrook's silence like a scream. Windows flickered to life across the sleeping town. Sarah knew she had maybe 10 minutes before they came for her. But the children in the mill basement didn't have 10 minutes. She'd seen them through the cracked foundation window. 7 kids from neighboring towns, chained to rusted pipes. Their hollow eyes reflected her flashlight beam like broken glass. The town council's secret was finally exposed. Sarah sprinted toward the mill district, her breath forming ice crystals in the October air. Behind her, porch lights blazed like angry eyes. The emergency siren should bring state police, federal agents, anyone from outside Millbrook's poisoned borders. Rule 5 demanded she turn away from outsiders. Tonight, outsiders were her only hope. Her phone buzzed with texts from neighbors. "Sarah, what have you done?" "They're coming for you. You've doomed us all." The mill's shadow swallowed her whole. Broken glass crunched under her boots like bone fragments. The basement door hung open. They'd moved the children. Of course they had. Footsteps echoed from the upper floors. Heavy, deliberate. The town council had arrived faster than she'd calculated. Sarah pressed against the cold brick wall, tasting copper and fear. Her plan was falling apart. The children were gone. The evidence was gone. But the sirens were getting closer. State police, FBI, media trucks would follow by dawn. Mayor Hendrick's voice drifted down from above. "Find her. The ritual needs 7. She'll complete the circle." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. She wasn't just breaking the rules to save the children. She was breaking them to become the 7th sacrifice. The basement. Doctors slammed shut above her head. In the absolute darkness, she heard something that made her soul freeze. The sound of children crying, echoing from somewhere deeper in the mill's foundation. They hadn't moved the children. They'd moved them down. But what she discovered in that deeper darkness would make her question everything she thought she knew about Millbrook's rules. The basement beneath Millfield's town hall smells of wet concrete and something else, something metallic. Mayor Hendricks leads me down the narrow stairs, each step echoing like a funeral march. The fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with filing cabinets. "You wanted to know about the 6th rule," he says, his voice barely above a whisper, "about why we really can't speak of what happens after midnight." My hands are trembling. The temperature drops with each step. At the bottom, he stops before a steel door marked "Records, Authorized Personnel Only." The lock is old, heavy. When he turns the key, it sounds like breaking bones. Inside, the walls are covered with photographs. Hundreds of them, black and white images dating back to 1952. Each one shows the same thing: people standing in the town square at midnight. Their faces are blank, expressionless, but their eyes are completely white. Every person who broke the 6th rule, Hendricks explains, running his finger along the timeline. Every person who spoke about what they saw after midnight. I lean closer to examine a photo from 1967. A young woman stands frozen in the square, her mouth open as if screaming, but no sound comes. Her white eyes stare directly at the camera. "What happened to them?" I ask. Hendricks pulls out a thick ledger, its pages yellowed with age. Names fill every line, hundreds of residents spanning 7 decades. Next to each name is the same notation: silenced. The 6th rule isn't just about keeping quiet, he says, his voice growing colder. It's about what happens when you don't. He flips to the most recent page. Fresh ink marks 3 new entries from this month alone. The last name makes my blood freeze. Sarah Chen, the woman I interviewed yesterday, the one who claimed she saw something moving in the shadows after midnight. "Where is she now?" I whisper. Hendricks closes the ledger with a sharp snap. "Standing in the town square, just like the others. Waiting, the fluorescent light above us flickers once, twice, then dies completely. In the darkness, I hear footsteps approaching from upstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They know you're here," Hendricks breathes. "They know you've seen too much." The footsteps stop directly above us. But what happened next made me understand why some secrets should never be told. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the blood-soaked note left on her doorstep. "You broke Rule 6. Now everyone pays. the town square filled with an eerie silence at dawn. Even the birds had stopped singing. For 3 generations, Millbrook's 6 rules had kept the darkness at bay. Never walk alone after midnight. Never speak the founder's true name. Never dig in the old cemetery. Never enter the abandoned mill. Never look directly at the shadow figures. And most importantly, never, ever try to leave. Sarah had broken the last rule. She'd made it to the county line before something invisible dragged her back. Her car found upside down in Miller's Creek, windows shattered, seats torn to ribbons. But she survived. That was the problem. The rules weren't just guidelines. They were a contract written in blood and desperation by the town's first settlers, a binding agreement with something that had claimed this land long before any human set foot here. Now the contract was void. Mrs. Henderson was the first to disappear. Her morning coffee still steaming on the kitchen table, front door hanging open like a screaming mouth. Then the Kowalski twins vanished from their bedroom, leaving only muddy footprints that led to nowhere. The shadow figures no longer hid in peripheral vision. They walked Main Street in broad daylight, their forms rippling like heat mirages. Children pointed and asked their parents why the tall dark people had no faces. Parents had no answers. Sarah stood in her living room watching her neighbors board up windows with desperate fury. Hammer strikes echoed like gunshots through the empty streets. She could feel it watching her. The thing that owned this place. It was hungry now. Angry. The rules had been its feeding schedule, carefully rationing its appetite across decades. One life here, one family there. Just enough to satisfy the ancient hunger without drawing outside attention. But Sarah had broken the contract. Now it would feast. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Frost spread across her windows despite the summer heat. The shadows in her house began moving independently, stretching toward her like grasping fingers. Sarah closed her eyes and whispered the one thing she'd never been allowed to say. The founder's true name. The house began to shake. Outside, every streetlight exploded simultaneously, raining glass onto the empty roads. But in the sudden darkness, something else stirred. Something the founder had buried beneath the town hall basement. Something that had been waiting for someone brave enough to speak its enemy's name. The real battle for Millbrook was about to begin. The silence in Millbrook stretches like a wound that won't heal. 6 months have passed since the last violation. 6 months since someone thought they could bend the rules that have kept this town breathing for generations. The empty lot on Maple Street tells the story better than any witness ever could. Where the Henderson house once stood, only scorched earth remains. The smell of ash still clings to the morning air, mixing with the metallic taste of fear that coats every tongue in town. Mrs. Chen pulls her curtains tighter as she passes the lot each morning. Her fingers tremble against the fabric, remembering how the flames reached toward heaven that October night, how they danced like prayers no one wanted to hear. The Hendersons broke Rule 3. Never speak of what happens after midnight. They thought their teenage daughter's screams were more important than the covenant. They thought calling the police would save her from whatever walks our streets when darkness falls complete. They were wrong. The fire started in their kitchen at 3:17 a.m. No electrical fault, no gas leak, just flames that burned cold and hungry, consuming everything that carried the Henderson name. Their daughter, Sarah, survived. She had to. She sits in the town square now, every day at noon. Her eyes are windows to rooms no one wants to enter. Her mouth moves in shapes that form no words anyone recognizes. The children cross the street to avoid her. Their parents pretend not to see the way her shadow falls wrong against the pavement, stretching toward places shadows shouldn't reach. This is what happens when you break the rules. This is what happens when you forget that some covenants are written in blood older than memory. The town council meets every Tuesday in the basement of the library. They count the days since the last violation. They update the ledger with names of those who have learned to keep their mouths shut. 17 families have moved away since October. 43 new families have moved in. The cycle continues. The rules remain. Because in Millbrook, Ohio, survival isn't about strength or luck or prayer. It's about understanding that some prices are paid by the living for the sins of the curious. Sarah Henderson rocks back and forth in her chair, humming a tune that makes dogs whimper and birds fall silent. She knows now what her parents never understood. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And some rules exist not to control us, but to protect us from what we might become if we're foolish enough to break them. In a world where everyone films everything, where secrets die under fluorescent lights and viral videos, how many towns like Millbrook still exist? How many rules do we break every day, thinking we're free? Subscribe if you dare to discover what happens when ancient covenants meet modern curiosity. The town council meets every third Thursday now. They've updated the rules. Rule 7. No social media posts about missing persons. The algorithm doesn't understand our traditions. Rule 8. Ring doorbells must be disabled after sunset. Something shouldn't be recorded. Rule 9. New residents receive a welcome basket. Inside, 6 laminated cards. No explanations given. Sarah Martinez moved here last month. Software engineer from Columbus. She laughed at the cards. Superstitious, small-town nonsense, she told her neighbor. Her Ring doorbell captured everything that happened next. The footage went viral on TikTok. 3 million views in 6 hours. Comments flooded in. This can't be real. Amazing special effects. What movie is this? From The Town's Secret became entertainment. Viewers shared theories, made reaction videos, created merchandise. But here's what the internet doesn't understand. Those weren't actors in Sarah's doorbell footage. Those screams weren't sound effects, and Sarah Martinez hasn't posted anything since. The town council called an emergency meeting. Rule 10. All doorbell footage belongs to the community now. They hired a social media manager. 22 years old, fresh out of college. Her job? Monetize the mystery. Subscription service launched last week. Exclusive Ohio Town content. $49.99 per month. Premium tier gets live streams. Thousands of subscribers already. They watch from their safe suburban homes. Eating popcorn. Placing bets on who breaks the rules next. The comment section fills with requests. Make someone break Rule 3. I'll donate $100 to see Rule 5 violated. This is better than Netflix. The town council reads every comment. They take requests now. Democracy in action. The mayor bought a Tesla last month. The sheriff's wife got plastic surgery. The town librarian vacations in Tuscany now. Business is booming. Survival became content. Terror became entertainment. Death became subscription revenue. The rules still stand. 6 sacred commandments carved in fear. But now they serve a new master. Not tradition. Not survival. Views. Every scream generates ad revenue. Every violation trends on Twitter. Every death feeds the algorithm. The town that once hid in shadows now performs under spotlights. And somewhere in the darkness, something ancient laughs. It never needed the rules to survive. It needed an audience. So tell me, viewer, as you sit there safely watching our pain through your screen, who's really trapped, us in our haunted town, or you in your endless scroll? Every click is a vote. Every view, a ticket to our show.